of here right now. People like you have no right to be here.
It's always your kind that struggles with simple instructions. The words hit the airplane cabin like shattered glass. Nobody spoke. Not a cough. Not a nervous laugh. Not even the sound of a seatbelt clicking. Only the low hiss of recycled air moving through the vents above, the faint vibration of metal beneath the floor, and the silence of more than 200 passengers suddenly realizing they were witnessing something ugly. Daniel Brooks sat in seat 22B. He wore a United States Air Force uniform. Clean collar, pressed sleeves, black boots polished so carefully they reflected the dim cabin lights. His face looked exhausted in the way only long deployments and endless airports could exhaust a man. He did not answer immediately. He simply lifted his eyes toward the woman standing over him, Melissa Carter, 41 years old, lead flight attendant for economy cabin. Her blonde hair was tied into a tight knot, navy blue uniform perfectly ironed. A silver name tag rested against her chest beneath the harsh white lighting of the aircraft. Melissa stood in the aisle like she owned it, chin raised, eyes cold, one hand pressed against her hip while the other gripped a tablet hard enough for the knuckles to pale. She had just crossed a line everyone on that plane understood. A white-haired man in row 25 slowly lowered his newspaper. His reading glasses slipped halfway down his nose as he stared at her in disbelief. Across the aisle, Sarah Whitman, a retired pediatric nurse from Portland, covered her mouth with trembling fingers. She had spent more than 30 years caring for children from every background imaginable. She knew the sound of cruelty when she heard it. Behind Daniel, a baby began crying softly. Rachel Turner pulled her daughter closer against her chest while her husband Kevin stood frozen beside the overhead compartment, his face burning with embarrassment. Only a few minutes earlier, they had simply been struggling to fit a diaper bag into the crowded bin above their seats. A normal problem, a forgettable delay. But Melissa had turned it into something else. The diaper bag held formula, medicine, wipes, extra clothes, and a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. Their daughter could not sleep without it. There's no more space, Melissa had snapped earlier. The bag needs to be checked. Rachel blinked in panic. We can't check that. Everything for the baby is inside. You should pack better. Her voice had not been loud. That almost made it worse. Kevin tried to stay polite. We got delayed at the gate because TSA had to inspect the stroller. We're not trying to hold anyone up. Melissa crossed her arms. That's not my problem. The tension spread instantly. Passengers avoided eye contact the way people do when they sense conflict, but hope it disappears on its own. That was when Daniel stood up. No drama, no raised voice, no performance, just quiet movement. I can help, he said calmly. The bag probably fits sideways. His voice carried the steady confidence of someone used to solving problems in confined spaces. Daniel shifted his own backpack, lifted the corner of a leather suitcase, rotated the diaper bag once, then slid it neatly into place. The compartment closed with a soft click. Problem solved. Kevin exhaled so hard it almost sounded painful. Thank you, man. Seriously. Rachel smiled weakly, eyes glassy from stress and exhaustion. Thank you so much. Daniel nodded once and started sitting back down, but Melissa was no longer looking at the family. She was staring at him. In her mind, this stranger had humiliated her in front of an entire cabin full of passengers. He had stepped into her situation, fixed it within seconds, made her look incompetent. And Melissa Carter had spent too much of her life clinging to tiny scraps of authority to let that feeling go. The morning had already been a disaster. Her alarm failed. Her ex-husband's lawyer had left another voicemail threatening court action. Her rent payment bounced 3 days earlier, and the premium first-class assignment she wanted had gone to Sophie Miller, a younger flight attendant now being considered for promotion. Melissa had smiled through clenched teeth all morning. Now she needed control back, and Daniel Brooks had become the easiest target. Sit down, she said sharply. Daniel looked up. Excuse me? I said sit down. When crew members are handling passengers, you do not interfere. Daniel's expression barely changed. I was only trying to help them settle in faster. Don't tell me how to do my job. Several nearby passengers turned toward them now. The atmosphere inside the cabin thickened. Daniel slowly lowered himself into his seat. Understood, but Melissa kept going.
Let me see your boarding pass.
Kevin frowned. Mom, he didn't do anything wrong. Melissa turned on him instantly. Do you want me to start checking your family too? Kevin fell silent. Daniel handed over the boarding pass without argument. Melissa snatched it from his hand. Seat 22B, she read loudly. Middle seat. Then stay in your seat and stop blocking the aisle. Daniel answered quietly. Yes, Mom. That calmness irritated her even more. She wanted resistance, wanted anger, wanted him to give her a reason to escalate, but Daniel gave her nothing. He simply sat there with his back straight and his hands resting calmly on his knees. His silence felt stronger than shouting. Melissa walked 3 steps away, then stopped. Slowly, she turned back toward him. Her eyes traveled across his Air Force uniform and settled on his face. For one strange second, the entire cabin seemed to stop breathing. Then she said it. It's always your kind that struggles with simple instructions. The words landed hard, cold, sharp, deliberate. Daniel looked up at her. A darkness moved quietly behind his eyes. Nobody on that airplane knew the truth. Nobody knew the tired man in the middle seat was not just Air Force personnel returning home from deployment. Nobody knew there was a federal badge hidden inside his jacket pocket. Nobody knew Daniel Brooks was a federal air marshal assigned to that very flight. And Melissa Carter, trapped inside her own bitterness and pride, had just stepped onto dangerous ground without realizing it. Daniel inhaled slowly, controlled, measured. Then he looked directly at her and spoke in a calm voice that somehow felt heavier than yelling. You should stop right now. Melissa blinked once, as if she could not believe Daniel had spoken to her that way. Not loudly, not rudely. That was what made it worse for her. His voice had been low, steady, and controlled. It did not beg, it did not shake, it did not bend. It carried the kind of authority Melissa had spent years pretending she had. For a second, she felt it. A small crack in the room she had built around herself. Then pride rushed in to cover it. Excuse me, she said. Daniel held her gaze. You heard me. The cabin went still again. A man in row 24 lowered his phone from his ear. A teenage girl across the aisle stopped scrolling. Rachel Turner held her baby against her shoulder, rocking gently, but even the child seemed to sense the pressure in the air. Melissa took a step closer. Her shoes made a hard sound against the narrow aisle floor. Click, click. Every step sounded louder than it should have. You do not give orders on my aircraft, she said. Daniel did not move. I gave you advice. No, she snapped. You challenged a crew member. Kevin Turner leaned forward, his voice cautious. Mom, with respect, he didn't challenge anybody. He helped us. Melissa turned her head slowly toward him. The look was enough to make Rachel grip Kevin's sleeve. Sir, Melissa said, each word clipped. Sit down and stay out of this. Kevin wanted to answer. He wanted to stand up for the man who had helped his family, but he had his wife beside him and his baby in her arms. He swallowed his anger and sat back. His face showed the quiet shame of someone who knew he should say more, but feared making things worse. That shame moved through the cabin. People watched. People judged. People hesitated. That was how bad things grew in public places. Not because no one saw them, because everyone saw them and waited for someone else to act first. Arthur Kellerman, seated beside Daniel in 22C, did not wait. He was a corporate attorney from Seattle, gray at the temples, careful by habit. He had been watching since the diaper bag. Now his phone rested low against his thigh, camera open, recording. His hand was steady. His jaw was not. Melissa looked back at Daniel. Stand up. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. For what reason? Because I told you to. That is not a reason. A faint gasp moved through the nearby rows. Melissa's face hardened. She had expected anger. She knew how to use anger. She could label it, escalate it, turn it into a report. But Daniel's calm made every action she took look smaller, meaner, more exposed. I need to verify your boarding pass again, she said. You already did, and now I am doing it again. Daniel paused. Inside him, years of training moved like machinery. Assess the subject, assess the cabin, assess threat level, maintain control. Do not escalate unless necessary. He saw Melissa's posture, too rigid, her breathing too fast, her focus too narrow. He saw Rachel clutching the baby. He saw Kevin's hands curled into fists. He saw Arthur's phone. He saw Sarah Whitman across the aisle, eyes wet, lips pressed together like she was holding back words she had learned to keep inside for too many years. Daniel slowly reached into his jacket pocket and removed his boarding pass. Not the other pocket, not the one with the credentials, not yet. He handed the pass to Melissa. She snatched it, the paper bent in her grip. Daniel Brooks, she read, Seat 22B. She said his name like she was trying to reduce him to a line on a manifest. Then she looked at his uniform. Air Force. Daniel said nothing. Melissa gave a short, bitter laugh. You military people think the whole country owes you special treatment. Sarah Whitman finally spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp with age and conviction. That man did nothing wrong. Melissa turned. Mom, this is a crew matter. No, Sarah said, her hand trembling on the armrest. It became everyone's matter when you spoke to him like that. A few passengers murmured in agreement. Melissa heard them. Her control was slipping in front of witnesses. That terrified her more than she understood. In her mind, all of it blended together. The divorce papers, the missed promotion, Sophie Miller smiling in first class, the credit card notice, the way younger crew members looked at her like she was difficult, the way passengers no longer seemed impressed by her authority. And now this man, this calm man, this black man in uniform, sitting there as if her anger could not touch him. Melissa leaned down, close enough that Daniel could smell coffee on her breath. You are one more word away from being removed from this flight. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time his voice changed. Still quiet, but colder. Then you should be very careful about what you write in that report. Melissa froze. Arthur's thumb tightened around his phone. Rachel stopped rocking the baby. Daniel continued, because there are witnesses, there is video, and there are regulations that apply to crew conduct before departure. Melissa laughed, but there was no confidence in it. Are you threatening me? No. He let the words settle. I am reminding you that authority has limits. That sentence struck the cabin differently. Some people looked down. Some looked at Melissa. Some looked at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. Melissa's cheeks flushed, deep red. You think you know regulations better than I do? Daniel did not answer. He could have. He could have ended it right there. He could have shown the badge, called the captain, changed the whole aircraft in one motion. But that was not his instinct. His instinct was restraint. His father had taught him that power was not something you swung around to win arguments. Power was something you carried carefully, because careless power hurt people. And Daniel had seen enough careless power for one afternoon. Melissa stepped back, lifted the boarding pass, then slapped it against his chest. The sound cracked through the row, not a slap to the face, not yet, but it was enough. Rachel gasped. Kevin half rose. Arthur's camera caught the motion. Sarah whispered, My God. Daniel caught the boarding pass before it fell. For a moment, his fingers closed around the paper. His breathing slowed. In his mind, the cabin sharpened. The crying baby, the humming air vent, the tight smell of coffee and jet fuel, the eyes, so many eyes. Melissa pointed toward the front of the plane. I am calling the captain. Daniel looked up. That would be appropriate. That response was the last thing she expected. Her hand dropped.
What?
You should call the captain. Melissa's face shifted again, confusion first, then suspicion, then anger returning because anger was easier than doubt. You do not get to decide what is appropriate. No, Daniel said, but the captain does. From the front curtain, Sophie Miller appeared. She had heard enough to leave the first-class galley. Sophie was 26, knew enough to still believe procedures existed to protect people, not just companies. Her eyes moved from Melissa's red face to Daniel's stiff posture to the passengers around him. Melissa, Sophie said carefully, do you need help? Melissa spun toward her. Go back up front. Sophie did not move. I heard raised voices. You heard a passenger refusing crew instructions. Arthur spoke before he could stop himself. That's not what happened. Melissa snapped. Sir, put your phone away. Arthur held it steady. No. That one word changed the cabin. Small. Firm.
Public.
Melissa stared at him. You are recording crew operations without permission. Arthur's lawyer voice emerged, calm and precise. I am recording a public incident in which a passenger appears to be targeted and verbally mistreated. We are still at the gate. I am not interfering with crew duties. A murmur rose behind them. Phones began lifting, one by one, not all at once, not dramatically, just quietly, the way people finally decide that silence has become cooperation. Melissa saw the screens. Her breath caught. For the first time, she understood that she was no longer controlling the story. The story was watching her. Daniel stood slowly. He was taller than she had realized. Not aggressive, not leaning forward, just standing. The aisle seemed narrower around him. Melissa took half a step back before she could stop herself. Daniel kept his hands visible at his sides. Call the captain now. Sophie looked at him. Something in his tone made her straighten. It was not passenger frustration. It was command discipline. Melissa heard it too and hated it. Sit down, she said. Daniel did not. Sit down, she repeated, louder now. The cabin held its breath. Daniel's voice dropped. I will sit when the captain is informed that a crew member has created a security concern in the cabin. Melissa's mouth opened. No words came. For the first time since the confrontation began, fear touched her face. Not enough to stop her, only enough to make her more dangerous. Sophie took one step toward the front.
I'll get Captain Reynolds.
Melissa grabbed her arm. You will not. Sophie looked down at the hand on her sleeve, then back at Melissa. Her voice shook, but she did not back away. Let go of me. The words were soft, but everyone heard them. Melissa released her. Sophie walked quickly toward the cockpit curtain. Melissa turned back to Daniel, breathing hard now. Her eyes were bright and furious, but beneath that fury was panic. She had lost the family, lost the witnesses, lost the junior attendant, and now the captain was coming. Daniel saw it. The moment a person realizes they are wrong but chooses destruction over humility, he spoke once more. Melissa, stop. But she did not hear wisdom. She heard humiliation. And humiliation in the hands of someone addicted to control can become violence. Melissa's hand moved before anyone could stop it. It was fast, sharp, ugly. The sound cracked across the cabin like a board snapping in half. Daniel's head turned slightly from the impact. Not far, not dramatically, just enough for everyone to know she had struck him. Then everything stopped. The baby stopped crying. The vent seemed louder. Someone whispered, "Oh my Lord." Melissa stood frozen in the aisle, her hands still raised halfway between them. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were wide, but not with regret. Not yet. She looked like a woman who had stepped off a curb and only now realized there was no ground beneath her foot. Daniel slowly turned his face back toward her. A red mark had already begun to rise across his cheek. He did not touch it. He did not shout. He did not raise his hand. That was what frightened people most. There was no explosion, only control. His eyes had changed. The tiredness was gone. The softness was gone. What remained was cold, focused, and official. Arthur Kellerman's phone was still recording. His hand had tightened around it, so hard his knuckles had gone white. He had seen executives lie in boardrooms. He had seen companies bury facts under paperwork. But this was different. This was naked, clean. Impossible to spin if the video stayed intact. Rachel Turner pulled her baby against her chest and turned the child's face away. Her own eyes filled with tears, not because she was weak, but because violence in a small space does something to the body. It makes the air feel smaller. It makes every exit feel too far away. Kevin stood halfway up. What is wrong with you? Melissa snapped toward him. Sit down. Her voice cracked. It was still loud, still angry. But something inside it had broken. Sarah Whitman unbuckled her seatbelt with shaking fingers. You hit him, she said. You actually hit him. Melissa pointed toward Daniel.
He was threatening me.
No, Arthur said from beside him. He wasn't. Melissa turned on him. Put that phone down. Arthur kept recording. I will not. The words landed with quiet force. A few rows back, a man in a gray cardigan lifted his own phone. A woman near the window did the same. Then another, then another. Screens rose across the cabin like small, silent witnesses. Melissa looked at them and seemed to realize 1 second too late that the story had left her hands. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt. The click was small. Everyone heard it. Melissa took a step back.
Don't you move.
Daniel stood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and still completely controlled. He kept his hands visible. He did not lean toward her. He did not crowd her. He gave her every chance not to make another mistake. But the authority in his posture changed the space around him. "Crew member Carter," he said. Melissa blinked at the formality. Daniel's voice was flat. "You need to step away from me now. This is my aircraft." "No," Daniel said. "It is not." The cabin inhaled. Melissa's face twisted.
Who do you think you are?
Daniel did not answer her. He turned toward the front of the cabin, where Sophie Miller had stopped near the curtain. She had seen the slap. Her hand was pressed against her own mouth, and her eyes were wet with shock. "Sophie," Daniel said, using her name from the badge. "Notify the captain immediately. Tell him there has been an assault in the cabin involving a crew member. Tell him the aircraft should not depart." Melissa laughed once. It came out thin and wild. "You do not give orders to my crew." Sophie looked between them. This was the moment that would stay with her for years. She was young. She was new. She still worried about being liked by senior crew. She still heard training instructors in her head telling her to respect hierarchy. But training had also said something else. Safety first. Always. Even when uncomfortable. Even when the person creating danger wore the same uniform. Sophie swallowed. "I'm getting the captain." Melissa stepped into her path. "You walk away from me and I'll write you up." Sophie's face went pale, but she did not stop. "Then write me up," she whispered. She moved past Melissa and hurried toward the cockpit. A murmur passed through the cabin, not loud, not celebratory, just the sound of people understanding that one person had finally chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. Melissa spun back toward Daniel, breathing fast. "You are done," she said. "You hear me? Done. You are getting removed. You are getting banned. You think that uniform scares me?" Daniel's eyes stayed on her face. He saw the panic now, real panic, under the anger, under the pride, under the years of resentment hardened into habit. He spoke more quietly. "Melissa, you need to stop talking." The use of her first name stunned her. It sounded almost kind. That made it worse. "Don't you dare say my name. Then stop giving me reasons to document it." The word struck clean. Arthur shifted in his seat. As an attorney, he knew language. He heard the precision in Daniel's voice. This was not a passenger trying to win an argument. This was someone building a record. From the front of the plane, the cockpit door opened. First Officer Mark Reynolds stepped out first. He was in his early 30s, lean, clean-shaven, with the alert eyes of a pilot trained to read trouble quickly. Behind him came Captain Thomas Hale, 62 years old, silver hair, square jaw, the kind of man who had spent decades making decisions with weather maps, fuel numbers, and human lives in mind. The captain looked down the aisle. He saw Melissa shaking with rage. He saw Daniel standing still with a red mark across his face. He saw phones raised. He saw passengers leaning away from Melissa, not from Daniel. That told him more than anyone's first sentence could. "What happened here?" Captain Hale asked. Melissa rushed toward him. "Captain, this passenger became aggressive. He interfered with boarding. He refused instructions. He threatened me. I need him removed before we go anywhere." Voices erupted. "That's a lie." She slapped him. He never touched her. "I have it on video." Captain Hale raised one hand. The cabin quieted, though the tension stayed. He looked at Daniel. "Sir, I need your account." Daniel stood straight. "Captain, my name is Daniel Brooks. I am a Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force. I was seated in 22B when crew member Carter escalated a baggage issue with the family behind me. I assisted with the bag. She then confronted me, made a racially charged statement, struck my boarding pass against my chest, and moments ago slapped me across the face." Melissa scoffed. "That is not what happened." Captain Hale did not look at her. "Let him finish." That small correction hit Melissa hard. Daniel continued, based on her current behavior, her physical assault, and her inability to de-escalate, I believe she is not fit to perform safety duties on this aircraft. Captain DeHale's eyes narrowed slightly, not at the accusation, at the wording, fit to perform safety duties. That was not how ordinary passengers spoke. Mr. Brooks, he said carefully, are you making a formal safety complaint? Daniel looked at him. Then, slowly, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. First Officer Reynolds tensed by instinct. Daniel noticed and paused.
My credentials,
Daniel said. Captain Hale gave a short nod. Daniel removed a black leather wallet and opened it. The badge caught the cabin light. United States Department of Homeland Security, Federal Air Marshal Service. First Officer Reynolds went still. Captain Hale's expression changed at once. Not dramatically. He was too experienced for that, but his shoulders squared, his face tightened. The entire situation rearranged itself in his mind. Melissa stared. The color drained from her cheeks. Daniel's voice stayed calm. Captain, I am Federal Air Marshal Daniel Brooks. I am now identifying myself because a crew member has committed an assault in the cabin and, in my assessment, represents a direct security concern. This aircraft should remain at the gate. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed easily. Melissa's lips parted. No, it came out small. Not angry now, just small. Arthur lowered his phone slightly, enough to stare over it. Rachel closed her eyes and whispered, thank God. Captain Hale handed the credentials back with both seriousness and respect. Agent Brooks, he said, understood. The word agent moved through the cabin like electricity. Agent, not troublemaker, not difficult passenger, not some man who did not belong. Agent. Melissa heard it too. Her knees softened, and she grabbed the top of a seat to steady herself. Captain Hale turned to First Officer Reynolds. Notify operations. We are not departing. Request airport police and a station manager at the gate. Reynolds nodded. Yes, Captain. Then the captain looked at Melissa. His voice was low, hard. Miss Carter, move to the rear galley and remain there. Do not speak to passengers. Do not interfere with crew. Do you understand? Melissa stared at him as if the sentence belonged to another language. Captain, I was only trying to keep order. No, he said. You lost it. The cabin went silent again. This time, the silence did not belong to fear. It belonged to consequence. Melissa did not move. For several long seconds, she simply stood there, gripping the seat back so tightly the veins in her hands showed blue beneath her skin. The cabin lights reflected against the moisture gathering in her eyes. Not tears yet. Shock. Pure shock. Captain Hale watched her carefully. In 38 years of flying, he had seen panic attacks, drunken passengers, medical emergencies. Even a man tried to open an exit door over Kansas during turbulence. But he had also learned something simpler. People became dangerous when humiliation cornered them. And Melissa Carter was cornered now. Rear galley, Captain Hale repeated. His voice stayed calm. That made it heavier. Melissa finally swallowed. Captain. I didn't know who he was. The sentence slipped out before she could stop it. Daniel heard it. So did everyone else. Arthur Kellerman lowered his phone slightly and stared at her with disbelief. Rachel Turner closed her eyes for a brief second like the words physically hurt to hear. Daniel's face did not change. Captain Hale's expression did. Slowly, carefully, the older pilot stepped closer to Melissa. That, he said quietly, is not the point. Melissa opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. Because somewhere deep inside her, under the anger and fear and pride, she knew he was right. It should not have mattered whether Daniel was an air marshal or a janitor or a tired father flying home after work. She had crossed the line long before she knew about the badge, and now the entire aircraft understood that too. Melissa looked around the cabin, the phones, the eyes, the silence. It hit her all at once. There would be reports, statements, video online, human resources, investigators, and worst of all, there would be no way to explain it away. Not this time. Sophie Miller stood near the cockpit curtain, pale but steady. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She had never seen a senior crew member collapse professionally in real time before. Training videos never captured the human part, the cracking voice, the desperate eyes, the smell of fear mixing with stale coffee and recycled air. Melissa saw Sophie watching her. That hurt almost as much as the captain's words, because Melissa remembered being 26 once. She remembered still believing kindness mattered more than control. Then life happened. Divorce court, debt collectors, long flights, lonely hotel rooms, years of passengers treating her like furniture unless they wanted something. Bitterness had not arrived in one day. It arrived in pieces, quietly, and now it stood exposed in front of strangers. "Move," Captain Hale said. This time, Melissa obeyed. She walked down the aisle slowly while passengers pulled their knees inward to avoid touching her. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody insulted her. Somehow that silence felt worse. Arthur kept recording, not because he enjoyed it, because he knew how quickly truth disappeared once companies entered survival mode. Daniel remained standing near row 22. Captain Hale turned toward him. "Agent Brooks, would you step forward with me for a moment?" Daniel nodded once. As they moved toward the forward galley, passengers watched him differently now. Not with fear, with recognition. A few minutes earlier, he had been invisible. Just another black man in a middle seat. Another tired traveler. People glanced past without thought. Now they looked at him as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same person. The quiet passenger, the federal agent. Daniel noticed the change immediately. That was the painful part. Not Melissa. Not the slap, the change. Respect should not arrive only after power reveals itself. Near the front galley, Captain Hale lowered his voice. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine. You want medical?" "No, sir." Captain Hale studied him carefully. "You stay remarkably controlled." Daniel gave a tired half nod. "Part of the job." The captain glanced toward the rear galley where Melissa had disappeared behind the curtain. Most people would have reacted. Daniel looked back down the aisle. Most people are exhausted. That answer stayed with the captain, because exhaustion explained more about America than anger ever did. People carrying too much pain, too much pressure, too much resentment, then handing it to strangers. First Officer Reynolds returned from the cockpit carrying a tablet. "Airport police are on the way. Operations wants statements from crew and passengers before deplaning." Captain Hale nodded. "Good." Reynolds looked toward Daniel. "Sir, thank you for identifying yourself before this escalated further." Daniel almost smiled at that. Further. He touched a red mark on his cheek for the first time. "I think we passed further a while ago." Reynolds looked embarrassed. "Right. Sorry." Daniel saved him from the moment. "You handled it professionally." The younger pilot straightened slightly at the words. People underestimated what respect could do to someone, especially in tense moments. Back in row 22, Rachel Turner bounced her baby gently, while Kevin leaned into the aisle watching the front of the cabin.
You okay?
Rachel whispered. Kevin shook his head slowly. No, his eyes stayed on Daniel. "I keep thinking about what would happen if he wasn't who he is." Rachel looked down, because she had been thinking the same thing. Would anyone have believed him? Would security have dragged him off instead? Would the videos matter? Would people still have spoken up? Those questions sat heavy inside the cabin. Sarah Whitman quietly removed a tissue from her purse and wiped her eyes. She thought about the 1960s, about bus stations in Georgia, about signs over water fountains, about her father teaching her never to stay silent when dignity was being crushed in public. She had failed that lesson once when she was young. She never forgot it. That was why she finally spoke earlier, not because she was brave, because regret lasts longer than fear. At the rear galley, Melissa sat alone on the jump seat. Her hands shook uncontrollably now. The crash had finally come. Not the professional crash, the personal one. She stared at her own reflection in the dark galley monitor and barely recognized herself. Mascara smudged slightly beneath one eye, hair loosening near her temple, breathing uneven. She thought about the exact moment she lost control. Not the slap, earlier. The second Daniel solved the baggage issue faster than she could. That tiny humiliation had awakened something poisonous inside her, something she had fed for years without admitting it. The need to feel above someone, Anyone. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Sophie. Melissa. Melissa looked up slowly. Sophie stood near the galley entrance holding 2 paper cups of water. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Sophie offered one of the cups silently. Melissa stared at it. Why are you being nice to me? Sophie hesitated. Because this is already bad enough. That answer nearly broke Melissa. Not because it excused her. Because it didn't. Sophie still knew she was wrong. Still reported her. Still called the captain. But kindness survived anyway. Melissa took the cup with trembling fingers. Thank you, she whispered. Sophie leaned against the galley wall, exhausted. I don't understand what happened out there. Melissa laughed weakly. Neither do I. But deep down she did. People did not suddenly become cruel. Cruelty was usually stored pain looking for a weaker target, and Daniel had looked safe to target. A tired black man in a middle seat. That was the truth she would have to live with now. Near the front cabin door, airport police finally boarded the aircraft. 2 officers. Dark uniforms, utility belts, professional expressions. Conversations across the cabin died immediately. Officer Ben Collins stepped forward first. Mid-50s, calm eyes, former Marine. The kind of officer who could usually tell within 30 seconds who the real problem was. Captain Hale met him near the galley. Thanks for coming. Collins nodded once. What do we have? The captain glanced toward Daniel before answering carefully. A crew assault involving a federal air marshal. The words shifted the atmosphere instantly. Officer Collins looked toward Daniel at once, not with suspicion.
With recognition.
Then Collins noticed the mark on Daniel's cheek. His jaw tightened slightly. Sir, Collins said respectfully, are you Agent Brooks? Daniel nodded. I am. Collins extended his hand immediately. Officer Ben Collins, Airport Police. I'm sorry this happened to you. Daniel shook his hand. Thank you. The second officer moved toward the rear galley. Captain Hale spoke quietly. The crew member is back there. Collins exhaled slowly before turning toward the aisle. Passengers watched him pass. Nobody reached for luggage. Nobody stood up. Nobody complained about delays anymore. Because suddenly this was no longer just about a flight. It was about something older. Who gets believed? Who gets respected? Who gets treated like they belong? And every person on that plane knew they had just watched those questions collide in real time. Officer Collins stopped beside Danielle's row and studied the cabin carefully before speaking again. Years in law enforcement had taught him one thing. The loudest person was rarely the clearest witness. So he watched faces first. Fear, embarrassment, anger, relief. All of it lived openly across the rows. Melissa remained hidden behind the rear galley curtain, but the emotional damage she left behind still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Sir, Collins said quietly to Daniel, would you mind stepping off the aircraft with me so we can take your statement privately? Daniel nodded once.
Of course.
Captain Hale turned toward the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. The aircraft will remain at the gate while this incident is investigated. A few groans sounded automatically. Not angry, just tired. People had connections. Medications and carry-ons. Rides waiting outside airports hundreds of miles away. Life did not pause neatly for moral lessons, but nobody argued. Because most of them had seen enough to understand this delay mattered. Daniel reached for his duffel bag beneath the seat. Rachel Turner suddenly stood up beside him. Wait. Her voice shook slightly. Daniel looked at her. Rachel adjusted the sleeping baby against her shoulder and swallowed hard. I just wanted to say, thank you. Daniel frowned gently. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Tears gathered in her eyes now. Most people would ignore us. You helped us anyway, and then... She glanced toward the rear galley. You still stayed calm after everything she said. Daniel looked at the child sleeping against her chest. A tiny hand curled near the baby's cheek, completely unaware of the ugliness surrounding her. That little girl deserves to grow up seeing adults solve problems without cruelty, Daniel said softly. Rachel's face crumpled for a second, not because his words sounded dramatic, because they sounded true. Kevin stepped forward and held out his hand. I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner. Daniel shook his hand firmly. You did eventually. Kevin nodded, ashamed. Still took too long. Daniel understood that feeling better than Kevin knew. Silence had weight. People carried it for years. Arthur Kellerman finally lowered his phone completely as Daniel stepped into the aisle. Agent Brooks. Daniel turned. Arthur hesitated. Corporate law had trained him to sound polished in difficult moments, but now his voice carried something more human. I'm sending copies of the videos to myself and cloud storage before landing. Nobody's going to lose this footage. Daniel studied him briefly. You think it'll matter? Arthur gave a humorless laugh. I've spent 30 years watching companies decide what matters. That answer told Daniel enough. Captain Hale moved toward the boarding door beside Officer Collins, while passengers quietly watched Daniel pass. The looks were different now. Respectful, some embarrassed, some admiring, a few deeply uncomfortable, because many of them were replaying their own first impressions of him. Middle seat, military uniform. Black man traveling alone, tired eyes. How many assumptions had been attached to that image before he revealed authority? The realization sat heavily on people old enough to remember other decades. Decades when uniforms protected some men and endangered others. Near row 18, an older white veteran wearing a Vietnam cap slowly stood as Daniel passed. The movement surprised everyone nearby. The old man raised one stiff hand toward his forehead, a salute, small, silent, perfectly straight. Daniel stopped. For a second, the noise of the cabin faded away. The veteran's eyes looked watery beneath the brim of his cap. You handled yourself with honor, son. Daniel returned the salute carefully. Thank you, sir. The old man nodded once and sat back down without another word. Several passengers looked away after that moment. Too emotional, too real. Officer Collins guided Daniel toward the jet bridge, while the second officer disappeared behind the rear galley curtain. The moment Melissa saw the uniform approaching, her stomach dropped. Officer Dana Ruiz was younger than Collins, but carried herself with the same calm authority. She crouched slightly to meet Melissa at eye level. Mom, Ruiz said gently, I need you to come with me. Melissa stared blankly ahead. Am I under arrest? Ruiz paused. Honesty mattered in moments like this. Right now, you're being detained while we investigate an onboard assault complaint. Melissa finally looked up. He's making it sound worse than it was. Ruiz noticed the defensive reflex immediately. Most people reached for excuses before accountability. What exactly happened? Ruiz asked. Melissa opened her mouth, then stopped because for the first time since the slap, she heard herself from the outside. A senior flight attendant, yelling at a passenger, making racial remarks, striking a federal officer. Nothing about it sounded survivable anymore. I lost my temper, she whispered. Ruiz held her gaze.
Did you hit him?
Melissa's breathing became uneven again. Yes, the word barely existed. Ruiz nodded slowly. Okay, no judgment, no lecture, just acknowledgement. Sometimes calm professionalism forced truth out harder than anger ever could. Back inside the terminal, Daniel sat in a small operations office beside Officer Collins while airport staff moved anxiously through the hallway outside. Phones rang constantly now. Operations managers, corporate security, legal department.
The machine had awakened.
Collins placed a paper cup of coffee near Daniel. You sure you're okay medically? Daniel touched his cheek lightly. I've had worse. Collins almost smiled. I figured. Daniel leaned back carefully in the chair. The exhaustion was catching him now. Adrenaline always faded eventually, and what remained afterward was heaviness. Not physical, moral, because situations like this never felt clean after they ended. No real winner existed. One life exposed, another life damaged, a plane full of strangers carrying new anger home with them. Collins studied him quietly. Most people in your position would have escalated faster. Daniel looked toward the office window where baggage crews moved beneath flashing runway lights. That's exactly why I couldn't. Collins nodded slowly. Daniel continued. People already assume black men become threats the second emotions rise. The margin for error gets smaller before we even speak. The room fell silent. Collins had worked airports for 23 years. He knew the truth in that sentence immediately. Not politically, practically. He had seen who got second chances, who got handcuffed first, who people instinctively believed. Daniel rubbed tired fingers across his forehead. I kept thinking about my son watching something like this online one day. How old is he? 10. Colin smiled faintly.
Good age.
Daniel almost laughed. Depends on the day. That small moment loosened the room slightly. Human again. Not headlines, not reports, just fathers talking. Meanwhile, down the hallway, Melissa sat alone in another office while an airline operations manager named Linda Carver reviewed witness accounts on a tablet. Linda was 58 years old and had spent decades handling crises for airlines, mechanical failures, passenger deaths, public relations disasters. She understood something important about modern America. Phones changed everything. In the past, companies controlled stories. Now stories arrived already filmed. She watched the footage once, then again, then a third time. Melissa's voice, the racial comment, the slap. Clear.
Unavoidable.
Linda slowly lowered the tablet. Across the table, Melissa looked hollow now. Her makeup streaked slightly beneath her eyes. Her posture collapsed inward. This isn't who I am, Melissa whispered. Linda looked at her for a long moment before answering. Yes, she said quietly, it is. The words landed harder than shouting. Melissa flinched. Linda folded her hands carefully. Maybe it isn't all you are, but it's part of you. And until tonight, you let it grow unchecked. Melissa stared at the table, because deep inside she knew the woman was right. Cruelty did not appear suddenly under pressure. Pressure revealed what had already been living underneath. Back on the aircraft, passengers still waited while statements continued. Sarah Whitman sat quietly beside the window, watching rain begin sliding across the glass outside. A younger passenger across the aisle leaned toward her. You okay, Mom? Sarah nodded slowly. Just thinking. About what? She looked out at the dark runway lights blinking through the rain. About how dangerous small humiliations can become when people carry them too long. The younger woman frowned slightly. Sarah smiled sadly. And about how much courage it takes to stay calm when someone wants you to become their excuse. The younger woman looked down the aisle where Daniel had stood earlier. He seemed strong. Sarah nodded once. No, she said softly. He seemed disciplined. There's a difference. Outside the terminal windows, thunder rolled low over the runway. And inside Aurora Airlines, Flight 318, every person who witnessed the confrontation understood something uncomfortable. Respect should never depend on discovering someone's title after hurting them first. Rain hammered the terminal windows hard enough to blur the runway lights into long streaks of white and gold. Inside the operations office, Daniel Brooks finally closed his eyes for the first time in nearly 2 hours.
Not sleeping.
Just breathing. The muscles in his jaw still felt tight. Adrenaline had drained out of him slowly, leaving behind exhaustion so deep it sat in his bones. Officer Collins leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely. You got family waiting in Seattle? Daniel opened his eyes again. My wife and son. Collins nodded. You called them yet? Daniel looked down at the silent phone resting beside the paper coffee cup. Not yet. Why not? Daniel gave a faint smile that carried no humor. I wanted to understand how bad this was before my wife saw it online first. That answer stayed in the room for a second because both men knew how fast things traveled now. One video, one upload, one headline. Lives could change before people even reached baggage claim. Collins glanced through the office window toward the hallway, where airline staff rushed past carrying tablets and folders. Too late for quiet now. Daniel knew he was right. In another office down the corridor, Aurora Airlines executives had already begun damage control, not justice, control. There was a difference. Linda Carver sat at the head of a conference table, while two younger corporate managers argued in clipped voices across from her. We need to contain the footage. You can't contain 6 different passenger uploads. Then we issue a statement immediately. Without legal approval, Linda rubbed her temples slowly. The room smelled like printer toner and stress. You're both missing the point, she said. The younger manager stopped talking, Linda tapped the tablet screen, showing frozen footage of Melissa standing over Daniel. The problem isn't the video, she said quietly. The problem is that it happened. Silence followed. One manager finally muttered, social media's already calling it racial profiling. Linda looked at him sharply. That's because it was. The younger man looked away immediately. Across the hallway, Melissa sat alone beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look older and more tired than they were. She had removed her name badge. It sat face down on the table beside her. For 15 years, that badge had meant identity, stability, authority, a reason to wake up. Now she could barely look at it. Officer Ruiz stood near the door, finishing paperwork, while Melissa stared blankly ahead. I never thought my life would end like this, Melissa whispered. Ruiz glanced up from the report.
Your life isn't ending.
Melissa laughed bitterly. You know what I mean. Ruiz studied her carefully before answering. No, she said. I know what consequences feel like when they arrive all at once. Melissa's eyes drifted toward the dark television mounted high in the corner of the room. Airport news coverage rolled silently across the screen. Flights delayed, storm warnings, political arguments, normal American noise. And somewhere inside that noise now lived her face, her voice, her anger. Melissa pressed shaking fingers against her forehead. I'm not a racist. Ruiz stayed quiet for a moment. Then she asked the only question that mattered. If Agent Brooks wasn't an air marshal,
Would you have treated him differently?
Melissa opened her mouth. Nothing came out because honesty had become dangerous now. Not legally, personally. The silence answered for her. Back inside the aircraft, passengers had finally begun deplaning in slow, exhausted lines. Nobody rushed anymore. The emotional energy had burned itself down into something heavier. People spoke quietly, carefully, as if loud voices might restart the whole nightmare. Sarah Whitman stood near the exit, holding her purse against her chest when Sophie Miller approached her. You okay, Mom? Sophie asked softly. Sarah smiled faintly. Old enough to survive one ugly evening. Sophie tried to smile back, but failed. I keep replaying it in my head, she admitted. I should have stepped in sooner. Sarah shook her head immediately. No, you stepped in when it mattered. But what if I hadn't? Sarah looked toward the empty rows behind them. That's exactly why you did. Sophie lowered her eyes. The older woman reached out and squeezed her hand gently. Courage rarely feels brave in a moment. Usually it feels uncomfortable. Those words landed deeply because Sophie still felt ashamed of hesitating, not because she approved of Melissa, because fear was real. Workplace fear, social fear, fear of becoming the next target. That was how silence survived inside institutions, one frightened person at a time. Near Bad Guys claim, Arthur Kellerman stood beside a charging station, emailing copies of the video to 3 separate accounts. His wife answered on speakerphone after the second ring. You still at the airport?
Yes.
You sound strange. Arthur watched passengers dragging luggage beneath harsh white lights. I watched a woman destroy her life tonight. His wife went quiet. Arthur continued. And the worst part is, I think she thought she was defending order. Meanwhile, Daniel finally unlocked his phone. 3 missed calls from Olivia. 2 text messages. You landed, yet Ethan stayed awake waiting for you. Daniel stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then he pressed call. Olivia answered instantly.
Daniel?
Hearing her voice almost cracked something inside him. Not because he was weak, because home was the one place he did not have to stay guarded. Hey, he said quietly. You okay? Daniel looked through the office window at airport workers moving through puddles outside, beneath flashing storm lights. Long night. Olivia heard it immediately. 20 years together taught people how to hear what words avoided.
What happened?
Daniel leaned back slowly in the chair. There was an incident on the plane. Silence. Then softer now. Are you hurt? No. Another silence. Is it going public? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Probably already has. Olivia exhaled slowly on the other end. He could picture her standing in their kitchen, with one hand against the counter, shoulders tense, trying not to panic before hearing details.
What did you do?
She asked. Daniel looked down at the red mark still visible on his cheek in the dark reflection of the office window. Eyes stayed calm. Olivia's voice trembled slightly. That's what scares me, because she knew what calm cost him. People praise restraint without understanding its weight, especially for black men, especially in uniforms, especially in public confrontations where one wrong movement could rewrite the entire story forever. Daniel heard movement in the background, then Ethan's sleepy voice. Dad? Daniel straightened instinctively. Hey, buddy. You coming home? The question nearly hurt. Soon. You promise? Daniel swallowed once.
Yeah.
I promise. Ethan yawned loudly into the phone. Mom said airplanes are safe because heroes work on them. Daniel looked at Officer Collins standing quietly near the doorway, pretending not to listen. Your mom's smart. Did you catch bad guys? Daniel almost smiled. Something like that. You tired? Very. Okay. Love you, Dad. Daniel stared at the floor after the call ended. For several seconds, the room stayed completely silent. Then Collins spoke softly.
Good kid.
Daniel nodded once. The older officer hesitated before asking, Can I say something honestly? Sure. Collins shifted his weight. Tonight could have gone very differently. Daniel knew exactly what he meant if he had raised his voice. Moved too quickly. Lost control for even 1 second. The badge might not have mattered fast enough. The room darkened slightly as thunder rolled outside again. Daniel finally spoke. That's the thing people don't understand about restraint, he said quietly. Sometimes restraint isn't about dignity. Sometimes it's survival. Collins looked away after hearing that, because there was nothing to argue with. Down the hallway, Linda Carver received the final legal recommendation from corporate counsel. Immediate suspension, pending termination, full cooperation with federal authorities. Linda read the document slowly. Then she signed it, not with satisfaction, with sadness, because she had spent decades watching Americans confuse authority with superiority, and every time that confusion reached its breaking point, everyone lost something. Near midnight, Melissa Carter finally walked through the terminal, escorted by Officer Ruiz. Passengers recognized her immediately now. Some whispered, some stared openly, some lifted phones again. Melissa kept her eyes down, not from guilt alone, from realization. Hours earlier, she had looked at Daniel Brooks and seen a problem to control. Now she understood the truth. The most powerful person on that airplane had been the one carrying enough discipline not to destroy her when he easily could have. And that realization would follow her far longer than any punishment ever could. By 6 the next morning, the video was everywhere. Cable news, Facebook feeds, airport forums, veteran groups, morning talk shows, everywhere. The clip lasted less than 3 minutes. Melissa's voice, the tension in the aisle, the slap, then the reveal, Federal Air Marshal. People replayed it over and over because it triggered something deeper than outrage. It triggered recognition. Millions of Americans had lived through moments where respect depended on status. The video forced them to watch that truth unfold in real time. Daniel sat alone in a quiet corner of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, waiting for his final connection home. He had not slept. His uniform jacket rested beside him, folded neatly over the armrest. A television mounted above the terminal bar played the footage silently again. Passengers nearby kept glancing at him. Some recognized him immediately. Others only sensed something heavy around him. Daniel kept his eyes on the rain outside the massive airport windows. Gray morning lights stretched across wet runways, while aircraft rolled slowly through mist. His phone buzzed constantly. Unknown numbers, news requests, federal supervisors, messages from people he had not spoken to in years. One text came from a former commanding officer. You represented the uniform well. Another came from an old high school friend. Man, I'm sorry. You stayed cooler than I would have. Daniel read neither twice, because praise felt strange after nights like this. People treated restraint like a superpower. They rarely understood the cost. Across this country, Melissa Carter sat in a small apartment outside Dallas, staring at the same footage on her television. Muted. Always muted. She could not bear hearing her own voice anymore. The apartment smelled faintly of stale coffee and rainwater leaking through an old kitchen window. Her heels still sat near the front door, where she had kicked them off hours earlier. She had not changed clothes, had not slept, had barely moved. The airline suspension paperwork rested on the table beside unopened voicemail notifications from corporate human resources. Her phone lit up again. Unknown caller. Again. She stopped answering after midnight. Now she just watched the screen flash and die over and over like a warning beacon. On television, the footage paused on Daniel's face immediately after the slap. Still calm. Still standing straight. Melissa pressed trembling fingers against her mouth. That expression haunted her most. Not anger, disappointment, like he already understood exactly what kind of pain had created her behavior. And somehow that hurt worse than hatred would have. A reporter appeared on screen discussing the incident. Critics online are pointing out that the flight attendant's attitude shifted dramatically after learning the passenger was a federal officer. Melissa grabbed the remote and shut the television off instantly. The silence afterward felt enormous. In saddle, Daniel finally boarded the smaller commuter flight toward Spokane. No media, no attention, just tired people carrying backpacks and coffee cups. Exactly what he wanted. An older flight attendant greeted him near the aircraft door. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, and reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. She looked at his boarding pass, then at his face. Recognition flickered softly in her eyes. But she simply smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Brooks. Nothing more. No performance, no awkward apology on behalf of society, no forced gratitude, just dignity." Daniel felt himself relax slightly for the first time since Dallas. As he walked toward his seat, he realized something simple. Respect felt most genuine when it arrived quietly. Halfway through the flight, turbulence rattled the cabin hard enough to wake several sleeping passengers. A nervous little boy across the aisle grabbed his mother's arm. "Mom, is the plane okay?" The mother forced a smile she did not fully feel.
Just bumps.
"Sweetheart." The aircraft dipped again. Coffee splashed. Seatbelts tightened. A few passengers cursed softly. Daniel looked out the window calmly. Years of military transport flights made turbulence feel ordinary. The little boy noticed him staying relaxed. "Are scared?" the child asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "No, how come?" Daniel thought about the answer for a moment. "Because panic spreads faster than danger sometimes." The boy frowned like he was solving a puzzle. Then he nodded slowly and leaned back into his seat. His mother mouthed "thank you" across the aisle. Daniel nodded once. Small moments mattered, sometimes more than headlines. Meanwhile, Aurora Airlines headquarters looked like a building preparing for war. Conference rooms full. Legal teams awake since dawn. Public relations staff rewriting statements every 20 minutes. Linda Carver stood near a wall of television screens, showing nonstop coverage of the incident. One executive paced behind her. "We need stronger language in the statement." Another disagreed. "Too much admission creates liability." Linda finally turned around sharply. A woman assaulted a passenger on camera after making racial remarks. Liability already exists. Nobody answered because she was right. Again, a younger executive rubbed tired eyes. The air marshal part made this explode. Linda stared at him for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. The racial part made it explode. The badge only forced people to pay attention. That sentence silenced the room. Not because it sounded political, because it sounded true. At Daniel's home in Spokane, Olivia Brooks stood in the kitchen, washing the same coffee mug for nearly 5 minutes without noticing. The television stayed off. She refused to watch the footage again. Once had been enough. Ethan sat at the table drawing airplanes on scrap paper while occasionally glancing toward the front window. "When's Dad getting here?" "Soon." "You said that already." Olivia smiled weakly. "That's because I'm hoping saying it faster makes it happen faster." Ethan thought about that seriously.
Does Dad get scared?
The question surprised her. She dried her hands slowly before answering.
Yes,
Ethan looked confused.
but he's brave.
Olivia walked over and touched his hair gently. Brave people still get scared. They just decide other things matter more. Ethan considered that carefully. Then he returned to his drawing. Outside, snow had started falling lightly across their neighborhood. Quiet, soft, peaceful. Nothing like airports. Nothing like crowds. Nothing like the violent strangers carried into confined spaces. Back in Dallas, Melissa finally forced herself to open the voicemail from Human Resources. The voice sounded rehearsed. Pending final review, Aurora Airlines is placing you on indefinite suspension without pay effective immediately. Melissa closed her eyes. Indefinite. Such a clean word for collapse. Another voicemail waited beneath it. Her ex-husband. She almost deleted it. Instead, she pressed play. Melissa, I saw the news. Long pause. I know things between us have been bad, but you need help. Real help. You've been angry for a long time. She stopped listening halfway through. Because anger was easier to survive when she called it stress, or exhaustion, or difficult passengers. Now the whole country had watched what that anger actually looked like. Near noon, Daniel finally stepped through the front door of his house. Warm air hit his face first. Then the smell of tomato soup. Then Ethan slammed into him at full speed. Dad! Daniel caught him easily despite the exhaustion. Olivia stood a few feet away in the hallway. Her eyes immediately found the fading mark on his cheek. The room grew quiet, not awkward, tender. Olivia stepped closer and touched his face carefully with her fingertips. Daniel finally let himself breathe all the way out. You okay? She whispered. He looked around the house. Family photos, school papers on the fridge, snow falling outside the windows. Home, yeah, he said softly. This time he meant it. Ethan looked up at him seriously. Mom said you stayed calm because that's what good men do. Daniel smiled faintly. Sometimes.
What about bad men?
Daniel glanced toward Olivia briefly before answering. Bad men think power means making other people feel small. Ethan nodded slowly like he wanted to remember every word. Olivia wrapped her arms around Daniel carefully. For the first time since the confrontation began, nobody needed anything from him. No statement, no restraint, no explanation, just presence. And standing there in the quiet warmth of his own home, Daniel understood something painful. The real damage from nights like this was not bruises or headlines. It was how easily ordinary people forgot the humanity of strangers until power forced them to see it again. 3 days later, the country had already chosen sides. Some people called Daniel Brooks a hero. Others called him lucky. A few claimed Melissa Carter had simply cracked under pressure and deserved sympathy instead of public destruction. But underneath every argument lived the same uncomfortable truth. Nobody had cared much about Daniel until they learned he carried federal authority. That realization spread quietly through churches, barbershops, diners, veterans halls, and airport lounges across America. People talked about the slap, but what stayed with them was everything before it. The assumptions, the tone, the contempt. Daniel sat alone in his garage late that evening, polishing an old wooden toolbox his father had left him years earlier. The garage smelled like motor oil, cedar wood, and cold air drifting through the cracked side door. Snow tapped softly against the roof outside, while an old jazz station played low from a dusty radio near the workbench. He liked the garage because nobody expected anything from him there. No statements, no interviews, no restraint, just silence. Olivia stepped inside carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one carefully before leaning against the workbench beside him. You've been hiding out here for an hour, she said softly. Daniel looked down at the toolbox, feels quieter. Olivia studied him. The bruise on his cheek had faded yellow around the edges now, but she knew bruises were rarely the deepest injuries men carried home. You still haven't watched the video again, have you? No. You probably should eventually. Daniel rubbed a claw slowly across the wood grain. I lived it once already. Olivia nodded slightly. She understood. Some memories did not become clearer through repetition. They only became heavier. The radio host suddenly mentioned the incident during a news segment. Aurora Airlines officially terminated former flight attendant Melissa Carter this morning, following the onboard altercation involving Federal Air Marshal Daniel Brooks. Olivia reached toward the radio instinctively. Daniel stopped her gently.
Leave it.
The announcer continued. Civil rights organizations are now requesting mandatory de-escalation and bias retraining across multiple domestic airlines. Daniel listened quietly, not proud, not satisfied, just tired. Olivia sipped her coffee carefully. You know this is bigger than you now. Daniel gave a faint, humorless smile. That's exactly what worries me, because he understood something the public did not. The internet loves symbols. Real people paid the price for becoming them. Across the country in Dallas, Melissa Carter sat inside a therapist's office for the first time in her life. Dr. Helen Mercer was in her 60s. Calm voice, silver curls, the kind of face people instinctively confess things to. Melissa sat stiffly on the couch with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of water. The office felt painfully peaceful. Soft lamps, bookshelves, rain against windows, no shouting, no cameras, no uniforms. That somehow made honesty harder. Dr. Mercer glanced down at her notes. Tell me what you remember most clearly. Melissa stared at the carpet, his face. The air marshal? Melissa nodded slowly. He never hated me. Her voice cracked slightly. That's the part I can't understand. Dr. Mercer waited. Melissa continued quietly. People I've hurt before usually got angry, or rude, or loud. She swallowed hard, but he just looked disappointed. The therapist leaned back carefully. Disappointment can feel heavier than anger when we know we violated our own values. Melissa laughed bitterly. Maybe I don't have any values. That's not true. Melissa looked up sharply.
You don't know me.
No, Dr. Mercer agreed calmly. But cruel people rarely feel destroyed by their own behavior afterward. The room grew quiet. Melissa stared at the untouched water cup in her hands, then finally whispered the thing she had avoided saying out loud. I think I've been angry for years. Dr. Mercer nodded once. At who? Melissa opened her mouth, closed it again. Then tears finally came. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just exhaustion leaving the body. At everybody, she whispered. Meanwhile, Daniel's story continued spreading through veteran communities online. One video clip in particular kept going viral. The moment after the slap. The moment he chose not to retaliate. Comment sections filled with arguments, weakness, strength, discipline, survival. People projected themselves into that moment. Most missed the truth entirely. Daniel had not stayed calm because he was fearless. He stayed calm because experience taught him how quickly Black men could become the villain once physical confrontation started. That reality sat quietly beneath the entire story. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from his supervisor at Homeland Security, Deputy Director Marcus Hill. Brooks, sir, you holding up? Daniel leaned back in the kitchen chair while Ethan built a puzzle on the floor nearby, trying to. Hill exhaled slowly through the phone. The department wants to formally commend your restraint during the incident. Daniel almost laughed. Restraint. Always restraint, never the humiliation requiring it. That necessary? He asked. It matters. Daniel watched Ethan carefully connect two puzzle pieces together, only because the video got famous. Hill stayed silent for a second too long. That silence answered him. The deputy director finally spoke again.
You know why this hit people so hard?
Daniel looked out the kitchen window at snow melting along the fence line. Because they recognized it. Hill's voice lowered. Exactly. That evening, Rachel and Kevin Turner appeared on a national morning show by video interview. Their baby slept against Rachel's shoulder, while the host asked careful questions about the flight. Rachel looked exhausted but steady. The part people don't understand, she said quietly, is that Daniel helped us before anyone knew who he was. He didn't step in because he had authority. He stepped in because we looked overwhelmed. Kevin nodded beside her. And honestly, I think Melissa only saw him as a threat because he stayed calm. The host frowned slightly.
What do you mean?
Kevin hesitated, then answered honestly. Some people expect anger from certain people. When they don't get it, they push harder. The clip spread almost as fast as the original video. Not because it sounded revolutionary, because it sounded painfully familiar. Late that night, Melissa sat alone at her kitchen table, replaying the interview on her laptop. Kevin's words hit her harder than the firing notice had. Some people expect anger from certain people. She remembered Daniel sitting in seat 22B, still, controlled, respectful. And she remembered herself needing him to become hostile so she could justify her own behavior. The realization made her physically sick, because prejudice rarely announced itself honestly. It disguised itself as suspicion, as professionalism, as maintaining order, until consequences stripped the disguise away. Melissa closed the laptop slowly and buried her face in her hands. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to think about Daniel not as an air marshal, not as a headline, just as a man, a tired husband trying to get home to his family, a man she had publicly humiliated because her own pain needed somewhere to land. Back in Spokane, Daniel tucked Ethan into bed while snow drifted softly beyond the bedroom windows. "Dad? Yeah, buddy?" Ethan looked serious in the dim nightlight glow. "Why didn't you hit her back?" Daniel sat quietly beside the bed for a moment before answering. Because children deserved honest truths when possible. Because hurting people usually creates more hurt. But she hurt you first. Daniel nodded slowly. "I know." Ethan frowned. "So good people just let bad people win?" Daniel smiled faintly at the ceiling. Such a hard question. Such an American question. Finally, he looked back at his son. "No," he said softly. "Good people make bad people face themselves." Ethan thought about that for a long time. Then he nodded once and pulled the blanket higher. Daniel turned off the light and stood alone in the hallway. Afterward, listened to the quiet sounds of home. Dishwasher humming. Olivia reading in bed. Wind outside. Ordinary sounds. Precious sounds. And somewhere far away in Dallas, another person sat awake in silence, finally beginning to understand that dignity was not weakness. Sometimes dignity was the most difficult form of strength a person could choose. The federal hearing took place on a cold Tuesday morning in Dallas, inside a courthouse that smelled of old wood, floor polish, and quiet consequences. Melissa Carter sat at the defense table with her hands folded so tightly her fingers had turned pale. She wore a gray blazer borrowed from her sister. No uniform, no wings, no name badge, nothing left from the life that once made her feel taller than she was. Across the aisle, Daniel Brooks sat with Olivia beside him. He wore a dark suit, not his Air Force uniform. That choice was deliberate. He did not want the room to see only rank. He did not want the judge to see only a federal officer. He wanted the room to see a man who had been insulted, struck, and forced to turn pain into procedure, because that was the safest thing he knew how to do. Melissa glanced at him only once. Then she looked down. Her attorney whispered something near her ear, but she barely heard it. Her mind was trapped in another narrow aisle, another light, another silence after impact. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The sound of chairs scraping back filled the courtroom like a warning. Judge Marlene Whitaker was in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too many people try to explain away harm after it became expensive. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked over the file. The courtroom settled. No cameras were allowed inside, but reporters filled the back rows with notebooks balanced on their knees. Veterans sat beside civil rights advocates. Airline employees sat together in stiff silence. Sophie Miller sat near the aisle, hands clasped, still carrying the burden of having witnessed a mentor become a lesson. Judge Whitaker looked at Melissa. "Miss Carter, do you understand the agreement before the court today?" Melissa swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice sounded smaller than she expected. The federal charge had not gone to trial. Her attorneys had negotiated a plea agreement, probation, mandatory counseling, a community service, a permanent bar from cabin crew work during the probation period, a civil rights training requirement, a public letter of apology, no prison if she complied. Some people online called that too soft. Others called it mercy. Daniel called it accountability, with a door still open. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the government recognizes the seriousness of the assault and the racialized language used immediately before it. We also recognize Ms. Carter has accepted responsibility and has no prior criminal record." Melissa closed her eyes briefly at the phrase accepted responsibility because the legal version sounded neat. Real responsibility was not neat. It was waking at 3 in the morning, hearing your own voice say you're kind. It was losing friends who no longer answered calls. It was applying for jobs and watching managers pause when they recognized your name. It was learning that apology did not rewind anything. Judge Whitaker turned toward Daniel. Agent Brooks, I understand you declined to submit a victim impact statement in writing.
Would you like to speak today?
The room shifted. Every reporter looked up. Olivia placed a hand lightly over Daniel's. He stood slowly, not dramatic, just steady. He walked to the lectern and adjusted the microphone. For a moment, he looked at Melissa. She could not hold his gaze. Daniel began quietly. Your Honor, I have spent most of my adult life in uniform or in federal service. I have been trained to respond to threats, to protect others, and to stay calm when emotions run high. He paused. The courtroom listened. That training helped me that day. But I want to be clear. Training does not make humiliation painless. Melissa's lips trembled. Daniel continued. What happened on that aircraft was not only a slap. It was a reminder that some people still decide who deserves dignity by appearance first. No one moved, not even the reporters. I do not want Ms. Carter destroyed for the sake of public satisfaction, Daniel said, but I do want her held accountable. Not because she struck a federal officer, because she struck a human being. Judge Whitaker leaned back slightly. Daniel's voice remained level. If this case teaches anything, I hope it teaches that authority is not a license to diminish people. A uniform, a badge, a job title, a seat assignment, none of it gives anyone the right to treat another person as lesser. He looked down once, then back up. I hope Miss Carter does the work, real work, not public relations work, human work. Melissa covered her mouth with one hand. Daniel stepped back. The silence afterward was not empty. It was full. Judge Whitaker watched him return to his seat before turning toward Melissa. Miss Carter, stand. Melissa stood on weak legs. The judge removed her glasses. I have heard many defendants say they are not the person seen on video, she said. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes a single terrible act becomes the whole story in the public eye. But this court is not concerned with public appetite. This court is concerned with conduct, accountability, and public safety. Melissa nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Judge Whitaker's voice sharpened slightly. You held authority in a confined space. Passengers depended on your judgment. Instead, you used that authority to humiliate, escalate, and assault. That cannot be minimized. Melissa whispered, I understand. I hope you do, the judge said. Because understanding is the only thing that can make consequences useful. The sentence was accepted. Probation, counseling, community service, restitution for disrupted passengers, permanent termination from Aurora Airlines, a written apology to Daniel Brooks and the Turner family. The gavel came down once, sharp, final. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited behind barricades. Daniel and Olivia left through a side exit. Melissa did not have that option. She stepped into the cold air with her attorney beside her, camera shutters clicking like insects around her face. Reporters shouted questions. Miss Carter, are you sorry? Do you believe race played a role? Do you think the sentence was fair? Melissa stopped. Her attorney touched her elbow. Keep walking. But Melissa did not move. For months, other people had spoken about her, for her, against her. Now she had to speak without hiding behind panic. She faced the microphones. Her voice shook, but she kept going.
Yes.
I am sorry. And yes, race played a role. My assumptions, my behavior. I cannot undo what I did to Agent Brooks or the passengers on that flight. But I can stop pretending it came from nowhere. The cameras quieted slightly. I am not asking anyone to forgive me, she said. I am saying I was wrong. Then she walked away, not redeemed, not healed, but truthful for the first time. Weeks later, Aurora Airlines held its first mandatory cabin authority and bias training session at its Dallas. Not a slideshow, not a checkbox, not another corporate apology printed on glossy paper. Linda Carver made sure of that. She invited passengers from the flight to speak if they wished. Most declined. Arthur sent his video and a statement. Sarah Whitman recorded a message from her living room. Sophie Miller stood in front of 200 employees and told them what hesitation felt like. Her hands shook at first, then steadied. I was afraid of embarrassing a senior crew member, she said. I was afraid of being wrong. But safety culture means nothing if we only practice it when the threat comes from passengers. Several flight attendants looked down. Others cried quietly. Then Linda played Sarah's recording. The older woman's voice filled the room. Respect is not something passengers earn by proving who they are. Respect is the starting point. If you wait until someone shows power before you show humanity, you have already failed. No one spoke for several seconds afterward. In Spokane, Daniel watched none of it live. He was at Ethan's school gym, sitting on folding bleachers while his son played in a fifth-grade basketball game. The gym smelled like waxed floors, popcorn, and winter coats. Sneakers squeaked, parents shouted encouragement. A whistle blew too loudly. Ethan missed an easy shot and looked toward his father instantly. Daniel raised both hands and clapped. Keep going. Ethan nodded and ran back down the court. Olivia leaned against Daniel's shoulder. You okay? Daniel looked at the children running beneath bright lights, all elbows and hope and awkward courage. Getting there, he said, and for once, getting there felt like enough. 1 year later, Daniel Brooks stood in another airport, waiting beneath the soft glow of a departure board in Denver. This time he wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a navy jacket, brown boots polished out of habit, no uniform, no visible badge, no sign that the quiet man near gate B-17 had once become the center of a national conversation about race, authority, restraint, and dignity. Around him, travelers moved in familiar rhythms. A grandmother adjusted a scarf around her neck. A businessman argued quietly into a phone. A young mother wiped applesauce from a toddler's chin. A gate agent called for passengers needing extra time to board. The world had gone on. That always surprised Daniel after public storms. The internet could rage for weeks. News panels could debate your life like a courtroom with no rules. Strangers could turn your worst moment into a slogan. Then one morning, people still needed coffee. Children still needed rides to school. Planes still departed into gray skies. Daniel watched the crowd with the same trained awareness he always carried. Not fear, not suspicion, just attention. A woman beside him struggled to lift a small suitcase after one wheel broke loose. She was in her 70s, wearing a red wool coat and white sneakers. The bag tipped sideways and nearly struck her ankle. Daniel stepped forward. Let me help you with that, Mom. She looked up, grateful and slightly embarrassed. Oh, thank you. These wheels always behave until someone is watching. Daniel smiled gently and lifted the suitcase by the side handle. The woman studied his face for a second. Recognition flickered. Then she looked away quickly, as if choosing not to make him uncomfortable. I appreciate it, she said. You're welcome. That was all. No scene, no praise, no cameras. Just a simple kindness returning to the world the way it should. At the boarding door, a flight attendant greeted passengers with practiced warmth. Her name tag read Denise Walker. She was in her late 50s, with silver streaks in her hair and calm eyes that had likely seen every version of traveler America could produce. When Daniel reached her, she glanced at his boarding pass. Good morning, Mr. Brooks. Seat 12C, good morning. Her eyes lifted to his face. For a brief moment, he saw it again. Recognition, the video, the story, the slap, the badge. But Denise did not mention it. She only nodded toward the aisle. Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. Daniel paused. Something about the simplicity of that sentence touched him more than speeches had. Not hero language, not pity, not apology. Welcome aboard. A normal phrase, a respectful phrase, a phrase that should have been enough from the beginning. He found his seat and placed his small bag in the overhead bin. Across the aisle, a teenage boy helped his grandfather settle into the window seat. 2 rows ahead, a woman quietly asked another passenger if she could switch seats to sit near her husband. The passenger looked tired. Then he nodded. Sure, family matters. Daniel watched the small exchange and felt a quiet shift inside him. Maybe the world did not heal in grand gestures. Maybe it healed in small corrections, a seat offered, a bag lifted, a voice raised at the right time, a person treated as fully human before anyone knew their title. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. Safe flight. Ethan says, bring home airport pretzels. Daniel smiled. Tell him I accept the mission. He turned the phone to airplane mode and looked out the window as the runway began to slide past. In Dallas, Melissa Carter stood behind the counter of a community center cafeteria, placing cups of soup onto a tray. Her probation required community service, but she had continued volunteering even after the required hours ended. At first, people noticed her. Some whispered, some recognized her, some avoided her line entirely. She understood. She did not defend herself. She showed up anyway. Week after week, the center served veterans, single parents, seniors, and people who had fallen through cracks wide enough to swallow a life. Melissa had once judged people by how they appeared in front of her. Now she spent Tuesdays and Thursdays learning how little appearance explained. A retired mechanic with shaking hands still told jokes while eating alone. A former nurse slept in her car but remembered every volunteer's birthday. A young father in a work uniform cried in the hallway because he could not afford insulin and rent in the same week. Human beings, not categories, not inconveniences, not problems to control. That afternoon, Dr. Helen Mercer stopped by the cafeteria after a counseling session upstairs. She watched Melissa's hand a tray to an older black veteran wearing a faded army cap.
Extra crackers today, Mr.
Johnson, Melissa said. The old man narrowed his eyes playfully. You remembered. I'm learning. He nodded once. Good. World needs more people willing to learn before it's too late. Melissa looked down. The words stung, but they did not destroy her anymore. After he walked away, Dr. Mercer approached. You okay? Melissa exhaled slowly. Some days. That's honest. Melissa wiped the counter with a clean towel, slow and deliberate. I used to think shame was the punishment, she said. Now I think shame is just the alarm. It tells you something needs repairing. Dr. Mercer smiled faintly. That sounds like progress. Melissa looked across the room at people eating under fluorescent lights, their faces worn but alive. No, she said softly. Progress is what I do after the alarm goes off. Outside, rain slid down the center's windows in thin silver lines. Inside, Melissa kept serving, not redeemed in a single moment, not forgiven by everyone, not free from consequence, but changed enough to know that power without humility had once made her dangerous, and humility, painful as it was, had made her useful again. Months later, Aurora Airlines released a new passenger dignity policy across all domestic routes. It was not perfect. Policies never were. But this one mattered because it came from failure that could no longer be hidden. Crew members were trained to separate safety from ego, to document conflict without bias, to report crew misconduct without fear, to understand that authority inside a cabin was meant to protect people, not dominate them. Sophie Miller became one of the trainers. The first time she stood in front of a room full of senior flight attendants, her voice trembled. Then she remembered Daniel standing in the aisle, still, calm, unshaken. She lifted her chin. Safety culture means we stop danger wherever it begins, she said, even if it begins with us. Nobody laughed, nobody interrupted. They listened, and that was a beginning. In Spokane, Daniel returned home from Denver just after sunset. Ethan met him at the door, older now, taller by an inch. Still run like the house might disappear if he slowed down.
Pretzels?
Daniel held up the paper bag. Mission accomplished. Olivia stood behind him, smiling with her arms folded. You look lighter, she said. Daniel thought about that. The airport. The respectful greeting. The old woman's suitcase. The quiet flight. The ordinary kindness of strangers who did not need to know his power before offering decency. Maybe I am, he said. Later that night, after Ethan went to bed, Daniel sat on the porch with Olivia while the neighborhood settled into darkness. Crickets hummed in the grass. A porch light flickered across the street. Somewhere far away, a plane moved through the sky, its lights blinking softly against the clouds. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you ever think about her? Daniel knew who she meant.
Yes. With anger?
He took a slow breath. Not anymore. Olivia waited. Daniel looked up at the plane crossing the dark. I think about what happens when people confuse pain with permission. She was hurting. That was real. But she used that hurt to humiliate someone else. That was a choice. Olivia nodded gently. And you? Daniel's voice softened. I had a choice too. The night held still around them. He thought of the slap, the silence, the badge, the courtroom. His son asking what good men do. Melissa serving soup to people she once might have dismissed. Then he said the truth he had earned slowly. I chose not to become what she expected me to be. Olivia took his hand. No cameras recorded that sentence. No headlines carried it. But it mattered more than all of them. Because the real ending was not the punishment, the policy, or the viral video. The real ending was a man who refused to surrender his dignity, a woman forced to confront the harm inside herself, and a room full of strangers who learned that silence can protect cruelty or stop it. Respect should never wait for a badge. Kindness should never require proof of status. And power, real power, is not shown by making someone small. It is shown by staying human when cruelty gives you every excuse not to. If this story touched something in you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with these 3 words. Never stay silent.